let me introduce our host today. Well, if everyone knows me, right? So I'm going to skip my introduction, and I think everyone knows Butter already who's in the call. I'm going to pop some links, useful links in the chat on how you can play around with Butter if you would like to attend one of our demos, and also a link on how you can connect with John on LinkedIn. So I did mention already that this session is being recorded. Feel free to continue with your drawings before we start. I am super happy to welcome John as our host for this ButterMixer. And John is the creator of the Remote Agility Framework, which is what we're going to have a glimpse in today's session. And he's also the vice president of Remote AF. He is very enthusiastic about pragmatically blending practices from agility, psychotherapy, and organizational frameworks to create awesome work environments. So who wouldn't want to learn more on how to create awesome work environments, especially in today's times when there's this mix in between, come back to the office, go back home, and then it's hybrid and it's remote, and there's a bit of everything, right? So John, thank you so much for accepting my invitation and for giving us a glimpse into this interesting framework today. The virtual stage is yours, and you can take it away.
Oh, thanks very much for the generous introduction, and also thanks for having me here, Anna Maria. So one of the things that I might add to that is just around the creation of Remote AF, or the Remote Agility Framework. I was actually one of 14, so we had a full cohort of people of various backgrounds, sort of representing different disciplines and domains. Most of them have some kind of experience with agility, but also the vast majority has had some sort of secondary and tertiary skills that we brought to bear in bringing Remote AF together. So there's a bunch of detail around how you can find out more about those folks on the Remote AF website, but today you're regrettably stuck with just me. And I will do my best to give you a fairly reasonable introduction, hopefully a couple of tools that you could use sort of outside of this session. To kick things off, Anna Maria, could I get the permissions to link in the Miro, please? Perfect, here we go. Alrighty, so we're just going to zip into a little something I've prepared earlier. So you can already see folks are flying. My personal experience, this is one of my favorite things about Butter. It is an absolute joy to be able to interact with the people and the board at the same time, and not something that is easily done outside of the Butter context. So this is all fairly up to your own exploration. You're more than welcome to follow around. I'll be giving signals as to where I'll be at the point in time or what I'm talking to. But before I kick off, I might just share a little bit around what provoked myself and a couple of others to work on Remote AF. And essentially what we noticed, obviously, as the great storm that is COVID came rolling in, we had, sort of a couple of thoughts. One of them was, oh, this isn't going to be fun at all, and it's going to be quite terrible, and there's going to be a lot of things that we're not going to like about it. But also, with most of us having a bit of a consulting background, which leads to, sort of distributed working patterns, quite often working with international teams, different time zones, things like that, we kind of landed on this notion that, maybe it doesn't have to be bad forever. Maybe there is, a lot of really good practices that will emerge from this situation that can ultimately make work more sustainable and equitable and enjoyable for humans. And that's an interesting thing to consider. But that also sort of sets us a bit of a problem statement. Like, what are some of the things you might want to consider when sort of setting up a framework or a set of practices or a toolkit. And that's actually a question I'd like to share with the group, completely invitational. But does anyone have any ideas, either in the chat or through the speaker, around what are some of the things you think might make that a difficult thing to achieve, sort of getting those equitable and sustainable working practices in?
I've got some suggestions, John. Is
Yes.
Misha here? Hi. Different time zones.
100%. That's definitely one of them. Different time zones. Another one that we ran into probably earlier on than we expected was people in the same time zone, but geographically dispersed or in different geographical situations. So, the bandwidth of your internet might be different depending on what city you live in, depending on where in the world you are. Those things aren't necessarily universal at this point. So definitely time zones, logistics, even how people's daily calendars might line up. Anyone sort of with children, I am sure that things like homeschooling and pick up and drop off are not alien concepts after the past couple of years. And indeed probably weren't that estranged to certain measures before that. So yes, absolutely agree with that. Are there any other thoughts that are present for people around what are some of the things that might limit us in creating sustainable and enjoyable work practices? Anna Maria has an idea. Brilliant.
You're on mute, Anna Maria.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Misha. I think that if you don't have any structures or rules put in place on how to interact, remote work can very easily, some people might make abuse of their power while others' voices won't be heard or listened. So it's this structures on how do we communicate, how do we take decisions, and make sure that literally everyone's opinions is being heard and taken into account before moving on or deciding things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we look at in that is often, with decision making in particular, organizationally, it's important to understand how fast or slow a decision might need to be made. Some decisions, particularly if they're highly constrained ones, might have wide-reaching implications or even bump into things like regulatory concerns or legal concerns. Those will often need to be slower decisions and probably quite centralized. But that doesn't mean that necessarily all decisions need to be like that. You can have a whole bunch of decisions that can be migrated to teams, to individuals, and sort of don't need to sit in that centralized bucket. And there's also something else that you mentioned in there that I think is somewhat correlated to an activity we'll be playing with in just a few moments, and that is around sort of the empathy for people's different situations. So with a couple of those considerations aired, what I'll do is sort of, at least on my screen, zoom in a little bit on this top slide. So we had a few design principles that we wanted to take into consideration. If we wanted to essentially leave no team behind, we needed to make sure that all of our patterns would be suitable for remote, hybrid, and distributed work. So we don't publish something or make it available to our guides, who are sort of a group of practitioners that take this stuff out into the wild and do amazing things, until we're fairly certain that it's something that's going to work, regardless of how many different countries or how many different living circumstances might be in a given team or team of teams or organization. The other thing that we like to do is make sure it's modular. So all the organizations around the planet will have some things in common, but they'll also have a lot of things that aren't in common. And there might be only certain areas that they'll need help with. So we want to make things modular, so it can be customized to the context of the organization. And that leads us right into the next one, which is being tool and framework agnostic. So we're not here to provide the panacea to all organizational problems. There's already a wide array of things that definitely in the agility space. Sort of like Scrum is a fantastic framework for solving certain problems, as is Kanban, as is the list would go on. We're not here to try and replace those things. What we're here to is to try and connect them and make them relevant within a broader organizational context. And the last thing that we consider before we release anything new is that it needs to be repeatable. So if the team launch service, which we'll be playing around with a little bit tonight, or this afternoon, for everyone else on the call that isn't me, that's something that we've seen work again and again and again across a variety of different teams. There may be tweaks, but the general framing and the steps that we go through tend to be fairly reasonable steps for most teams to take. Down below that, we've got a couple of large circles or steering wheels, or however you might like to interpret them visually. Starting from left to the right, we've got the executives, then we've got the divisions area, and then we've got the teams area. So this is a snapshot of the breadth of the full remote AF system, which we commonly think of as a toolkit. Each of those labels or nodes that you might see around the edge of the circle are individual patterns or practices that can be used or applied in isolation, or they can be combined with each other to make a custom solution. Where we'll be spending some time today is in the team alignment space, where we'll be having a bit of a play around with a team launch. But before we jump into a team launch, and given the size of the group, we can probably sort of let this run for as long as it feels natural to do so. It'd be great to get a bit more connected. So here we've got what's referred to as a story me card. And if you've been in an office before and you've sort of had that situation when you go around to the desks and you see various trinkets, sort of signatures of, from sport or photos of families, that's something that we don't quite have a comparison to in a remote working context. We might have a window into someone's home. That's absolutely true, and it has its own implications, but we've also got things like virtual backgrounds. Some people also aren't very comfortable having their camera on all the time. So this is a tool that we use to try and start building that connectivity. So as an example of how that can work, there's my card, lots of photos on it, lots of words. I use it a fair bit, so I tend to put a fair bit of polish on it, or at least as much polish as makes sense for me. To give a bit of context to the images though, so I dabble in Gestalt psychotherapy in a clinical manner. I'm a cat dad of 3. Ninja's the only one that gets a photo though, because he's the only one that's well behaved. The other 2 are absolute monsters. I occasionally have a beard, and that photo was actually just taken out the end of Melbourne's first lockdown. So that was 1 lockdown's worth of beard. There's a couple of frameworks there. I have a background in Kanban, Scrum, a little thing called Sociocracy 3.0, which I still think today is absolutely fantastic and doesn't get as much recognition as it should. And of course, Remote AF, which is my current mission or commitment from a working perspective. I've got a couple of photos there of various workshops and conferences because I love working with people. That is what brings me joy. Down in the bottom left, we've got Fund Me, where I've got a couple of things around comics and a bit of combat sports, archery. I'm a bit of a nerd and I have fun with it. And it's a good way to spend the weekend for me. 3 things I can rely on myself for is I'm generally quite passionate. I'm fairly curious and I like to be fairly empathetic. And some things I need to watch out for is my whip limit. I don't tend to respect it. And I am also fairly stubborn, sometimes to a fault. So that's a quick snapshot of me. And what I'd like to open the floor to, and this can sort of go as deep as you feel like you'd like to take it, is just for folks to pick their own story me card. We've got plenty of real estate to work with here. And just spend a couple of moments sort of adding in, even if it's just with some stickies or mirror being mirror, you can also copy and paste in some photos. But even if we just spend a few moments just grabbing a story me card and popping in some information and see what might emerge.
I haven't worked with Miro before, but I can't edit the board. Is
Oh,
there
you
something I
can't
need?
work.
I'm
That
trying.
might be my fault.
I can zoom in and everything, but
So Alexandra, I think if you go to the left side of Miro, so not Butter, like a row before, you will see that arrow on top. It's the very first thing you see. Is it blue?
yes.
Okay, because if it's blue, then you should be able to click things around and add things.
Yeah, and it's a double click to. So if you double click on your name, it should allow you
Yeah,
to.
I'm doing that, and it's not doing it.
Oh dear.
But if I click on editing, it says you're a visitor on this board. Please log in or sign up to create your own board. So
That's no good at all. I've just updated the permissions. It should be. I can't make them any more open. Hopefully that might help. I might need
And
for me to
maybe John, you can pop the link of the board as well in the chat, so Alexandra can open it in another window in case you have some ad blockers on your computer.
I now see that I can draw on it.
Excellent.
Yeah, so then you can also add sticky notes from the left or just drop pictures from your computer.
Nice.
Whoop. I've just accidentally shuffled someone's card around. I'm very sorry for that.
And let me add a timer.
Yes, that'd be fantastic. Alrighty. So we've got a couple of cards with a bit of information on them, and really at the moment we're just trying to get a bit of an idea. There's a full activity and template built out around this in the Miroverse for those of you who want to have a bit of a bigger play around with it. But essentially what we're just trying to do here is be able to provide other humans within an organization with a mechanism to interact and engage. In a remote working context, it's quite common for a lot of the conversations to become very transactional in nature, which for some people and also in certain cultures that can work just fine around 90% of the time, but there is also sort of this delta it starts to create. And if you've ever experienced a silo or a part of the organization where two teams or two people just can't communicate in a remote context, those suddenly become chasms. And what we're looking to do here is to start actually surfacing up, sort of some of the things that we can relate to each other about. As an example, even though it wasn't on my story.me card, I am also an avid fan of cheese. And that's now something I know I have in common with someone else here. And it's a lot of those little things that you start to notice when you see a full team or even a larger group of people all sharing in this activity. And it can create a really solid foundation for other collaboration and sessions that you might want to hold with them. As an example, sort of in the wild and outside of sort of this kind of more, safe and enjoyable little circumstance, I've seen people just off the instructions alone be able to get through. This is an icebreaker activity in 20 minutes, and it's sort of something where they've been able to use as a bit of rapport building. I've also seen in the complete opposite end of the spectrum, groups of leaders actually spend around an hour or so with this activity and sort of really start to develop some connection.
Wow.
It can really start to create a different dynamic. One of the reasons for that is, particularly if you're a leader in a remote environment, and especially if you're someone that has moved into a new company or something like that, the propensity for other people to really know about you as a person is probably going to be quite low. and that can lead to interactions that no human would enjoy, whether or not you're a leader. So this kind of stuff is a really easy way for them to be able to start, especially if they're not folks that are used to having sort of the soft skills talk or human skills or those kinds of modalities. This kind of activity is a really straightforward and simple way for them to actually start building that connection with their team. Yes.
Hi, John. Yeah, you made a comment about that leaders can really get into this and maybe spend up to an hour. And I wonder if that's, when you get to a certain level in a company, it gets quite serious and quite sensible and just furiously busy. And the first thing I think of when I see these boards is a sense of play, and it's colorful, and it's the digital version of take a bunch of magazines and a pair of scissors and off you go and create your vision board. It's a bit like that. So I wonder if that's why, you maybe see these generally very serious, sensible people just having a whale of a time and being themselves, being all of themselves as opposed to the person at work, which is what they might do if they're working in a certain culture.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something we run into quite often. And from a leadership perspective, we've also got some other tools that are kind of a bit more of a halfway point where you can sort of, there is still a lot of whimsy and bringing all of themselves in, but we sort of have a bit of a deeper conversation around how that might correlate directly to the impact they have on their teams and the ecosystem around them. Depending on the kind of context you might be bringing it to, there could potentially be some other things in the toolkit that are going to be useful. But as a introductory activity, even if it's just positioned as a, hey, let's just do this as a bit of an icebreaker for a workshop, particularly in that leadership space, we've then seen leaders, generally more so than others, start to use this over and over again as a part of, I'm here giving a presentation about this big change in the organization, and don't forget, I'm also a human, so here's a little bit about me. And that just becomes a thing that falls into regular practice. Were there any other thoughts, comments, reflections, as we sort of have a bit of a look at some of the stories people have told visually?
So, John, I would like to add something to this, because I really do believe that in the remote setting, one has to be very mindful and be open and readiness from the whole team, including leadership, to build in this me, human, somehow ways of interacting with the team in a lot of touch points. Like, for example, what we have at Butter is it's a channel that is reserved in Slack for Monday selfies. So every single Monday, every single person is sending a selfie, and the person who starts the selfie, who sends the first one, can pick a theme. And the themes can be like from this is my pet to this is my workspace, to you in the sun, to you with a plant, you with an apple, whatever, right? So, and everyone plays with. So it's very refreshing to build in those connections, or just like our socials, and we take turns to organize a social every Friday with our team. So everyone drops everything and you're in there and you're just having fun, for example. Yeah, and it becomes somehow this close to serendipitous moments that you would have otherwise in the office, when you would just bump into someone and would be like, hey, so how's your weekend? Yeah, so channels like food or weekend or family, where people just like upload stuff from their life.
That is absolutely magnificent. And it's also, it's one of those things where, there's a sort of piece of research that was done on a very tragic series of events that I'll sort of save to go into if anyone's interested in very intriguing but not fantastic to read research. I'm happy to share it outside the session. But what I will share is the output of it. And it basically had some very strong data that when people are deprived of connection and deprived of social interaction, it actually starts to have impacts and limitations on cognitive function. And it'll even go as far as to, you know, if it impacts you at a particular age, it'll actually halt the growth of a vital organ that sits inside our head. So it's one of those things where it really can't be undersold, the value of having mechanisms for stimulating that social connection in your organization. It'll make work move faster for those that are more, you know, utilitarian about things, but it'll also make things just generally more pleasant, empathetic, enjoyable to work in, and especially like those lovely nuanced elements like having those channels for Monday morning selfies and things like that. Like those kinds of practices are fantastic. In larger organizations, at least from my experience, they can be hard to hold on to. They tend to start to flicker away. This is just one of those tools that we tend to use to try and help nudge some of that out. And it actually has a bit of extra use down below the story mini cards, where we'll have a bit of a play around with the team launch canvas. So one of the other things that we like to do, we don't always manage to achieve it in Remote AF, is building and reuse between the patterns. So the idea is that you know, sort of facilitating workshops can be really fun and can be really amazing, especially with, you know, something like Butter. I can't praise it enough. It's something that I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of using, sort of particularly for a lot of internal meetings is what we tend to use it for at the moment. But it's great to be able to take shortcuts, yeah? Like where there's things where it's like, you know, we've had this discussion before, that we can leverage that before. It's great to be able to try and bring some of that stuff in so we can make the most out of the collaboration time that we do have. So this right here is the Remote Team Alliance. Now this is the centerpiece to the team launch canvas and is very on theme with some of the things we've already been discussing around empathy, alignment. We even get a little bit of time that we spend on sort of how things might work differently if we've got people across different time zones. And the first step to that is often the team name. Now, I've left this canvas blank so we could have a bit of a play around with it tonight and talk about different things that might be useful to do in each of these sections, just so you've got something that you can potentially take back or apply to another context. But when we've come out the back of the story.me exercise, what we'll generally tend to do is try and use that as a bit of an influence for what our team name might be. So just as an experiment, this is usually easier when you've got like sort of a much wider range of people, but let's have a bit of a go at it anyway. Can anyone see any themes with our story me cards at all?
I think given the Netherlands connection and the love of cheese, that's probably cheese, yeah.
Cheese? Excellent. I can subscribe to cheese. So what I'd like to do is if we could even just spend like maybe 2 minutes just throwing down some ideas in the team name, keeping in mind some of what we've learned about each other up in the story me space, and just adding in anything that comes to mind. There's no wrong answers. We just want a bit of an open space. For the context of our team, it's drumroll, us. So we're a team and we're just looking to have a bit of fun during this event. So just adding in sticky notes, I think if I remember my hotkeys correctly on Miro, that is an N, or you can click on the left-hand side. It is the 4th or 5th one down from the pointer up the top. So any team names will do. You can go for some of the tried and true ones like pop culture references and things like that, but bonus points if we've got anything that can kind of tie back to some of the content from our story me cards. Everything's good. Brilliant. Cheesy trailblazers, love it. Okay, so just while we're doing that, I'm just going to give us a couple of dots around the edge. Now you can always use things like survey tools, polling, whatever might suit your context. But up the top there, I've got a bunch of dots, way more than one per person. So that's potentially a less considered facilitator approach to take. But just, again, free roam, let's just drag some dots down to whatever is, sort of striking our fancy. What are some of the names we like? And let's just see if a clear winner emerges, or if we want to do a couple of rounds of this. All right. So does anyone have any thoughts around why I wanted to try and bring the Story Me content into the name? Yes.
Yeah, to encourage people to actually reflect on other people's boards and start to learn about each other and build on that.
That's definitely a significant part of it. Yes.
To have them realize that they have a common ground, so they already have something in common that binds them. And if you take that in the team name, then you forever remember that we all like cheese and everything's Gouda, right?
Absolutely. So I think both of those things are 100% what we were going for, kind of in a sequence nearly. So we want to try and sort of get corral folks to make sure that we actually spend some time to get to know each other. We're going to be working in a team at least for the next little while. So it's good that we get a bit of a sense of who we're working with, and getting that common ground is fantastic. And then when we think about, 6 months down the line when we might be in a bit of a slump as a team, things like having a common and shared identity, a team name that really sort of actually binds us and is something that is unique to us as a group of people, is something that's going to be really important. And sport is generally, for those that are really passionate about a particular sport team, it's like sport teams will change some of their branding from time to time and things like that, or might merchandise with different products. But it is the binding of that culture and things like the name and the feeling you get when you go and support them and when you're around other fans. That's the kind of stuff we're trying to tap into here. Humans like to be together and like to share an identity, generally speaking. So having just one link that we can create together as something that will see us through both good times and some of the more challenging times. So that's a little bit about team name. It's not always going to work that easily. So when you take this into anger, sort of with an organization, they might already have a team name. They may not really want to revisit that discussion, or they might have some framing around needing a more functional team name. I'll usually try and push for a bit of a compromise. That's because, as I mentioned in my story, I can be a little stubborn. Whenever afforded the opportunity, it's a great thing to explore. And I'll try and squeeze in just a small anecdote that I'm stealing from Remote AF's founder, Andrew Blaine. He was actually, again, and this was a leadership context, some of the most interesting war stories come out of that space. But he was running this with a team of leaders that were, going through the motions of trying to set themselves up to function as a team, rather than a bunch of, questions. I love questions.
I didn't want to interrupt your story. It's not that urgent, but I was just wondering, with how many people would you recommend doing this? Because I can imagine that there's some sort of maximum where it might not work anymore, where it's too much, or how do you see that?
So to give the purest Remote AF answer, we look at three team archetypes, and usually find that most teams will be very close to one of those 3 archetypes. The first is a mission team, which is a team that exists to achieve an outcome, usually have a lot of freedom, and so they will work solely to go for an outcome. When dealing with a mission team, I will do the minimum amounts of this canvas required to bind them together so they can work as a cohesive unit, and then I'll get out of their way because that's probably what they want anyway. And they will usually be a team on the lower side of the under 10. So you're talking like, your 5, 6, probably even smaller, depending on what the situation is. Product teams, so yes, software development. So if you're innovation spaces, teams that are developing and building new areas of value for the business or maturing them. So that's sort of, we lightly sort of reference the kind of Scrum theory around that. So if you're getting above 9, that might be a bit much. Sometimes realities will force you above that figure, and that is a thing that happens. So this canvas, I find, really hits its stride with products. It's very similar to a lot of the social contracting they might be doing anyway. So the sort of standard kind of challenges you might run into there will apply. All of those things being said, I've also run this with operations teams, which can have quite large groups. If I'm dealing with an operations team that is, like sort of larger than say 15 or so, I might be having a few curiosities around the operating model and why is it an operations team that large? Is it really making sense anymore? And this still holds up in that context. We, up in the division space, the orange circle up above the story.me's, we've got space for looking at a team of teams, which is a very similar layout to this pattern, but it's more looking at things in terms of, 6 to 20 teams, sort of like, how do you really bring that kind of alignment and empathy across a much wider group of people?
Thanks. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. So just to tie off the anecdote that I kicked off with back there, when working with this group of leaders, they were trying to bring them together, and they actually went through, and they were one of these groups that spent a reasonable amount of time playing around with the story.me cards. They wanted to, sort of build some fairly strong relationships so they could, sort of go forth and actually reshape how they were operating within the organization. And what they noticed was that there was kind of like these couple of things that kept on coming up. So a lot of folks on the team really enjoyed photography. And there are a lot of people that really had sort of, had either traveled to Japan, either just for snowboarding, or they liked anime or whatever it might be. And after, sort of a similar kind of process to what we went through there with, a little extra chatter, because it's always easier when you've got a live working context. They ended up being referred to as the Sunsets and Snow Monkeys, and this team enjoyed that name so much that they even got an illustration of a snow monkey with a sunset in the background, and then put that on mugs that each of them now have in their sort of remote working situations. So it's one of those things where this can just be a name that is how the team refers to themselves. But, you will find instances where people will really take it as like nearly an internal brand and run with it and become very passionate about it. So that brings us over to the team purpose. I am a big fan of enjoyable swag, as long as that's not the only thing you're relying on, which I'm also very guilty of swag. I've got my remote AF jacket hanging up in the background. I absolutely adore it. But there is a trap in thinking that if you just give them swag, then you have a culture. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do here. Start with the culture and then let the swag emerge. But here we are with the team purpose. Now, as a general rule, and I'll see if I can steal the little drawing tool. As a general rule, so that this can be a very long activity or a short one. Typically, I'll do some workshopping with stakeholders around, what's the strategic intention for the team, or what are their key goals, or what are they being measured on at the moment in preparation for running this in the scary real world. But what I'll usually do is reserve the top half of that team purpose to be about the team. So if you're talking about, say, some kind of IT support team or customer support team, you're looking at Everything Scooter, who is a collective of people attending ButterMixer 23. And we endeavor to have an enjoyable time and hopefully learn some useful things. And that should ideally be fairly static. That's something which should be really bound to the team and something that represents who they are, where they sit in the organization, and what they're here to do. The bottom half, below the highlighting there, that's something where it could actually be a little flexible. So in that space is where we want to try and capture things like our, so what's our current strategy or objectives, whatever kind of construct the organization is using. We actually want to bake that into the team purpose. And the reason for that is essentially the purpose is going to be informed by the expectations that sit outside the team. Like, what are the things that the executives in the organization are looking at this particular team for? Is it maintaining a product? Is it getting that feature out on time? Is it launching something new entirely? We want to try and absolutely OKRs. If there are OKRs there, I definitely want to see them showing up in here in some way, shape, or form. Bonus points if you're someone that is using OKRs in terms of like actually having some fairly sound, well workshopped key results. One of the things that I'll sort of temper that with is when you're looking at the operational teams, depending on how your organization is interpreting OKRs. If the OKR is taking precedent over the operational work, that can cause a bit of attention that can be counterproductive. So that's just one to watch out for, but that's only with that particular archetype. The other two tend to sit just fine with OKRs, generally speaking. So that's generally something that we want to try and balance. And again, if you're not in love with this lovely little syntax we've got there, the team, who, endeavor, aim, why, and what we're looking to achieve, you can go back to sort of things like elevator pictures, even just having the OKR there. If you're a product team and your OKRs are being changed on a fairly regular cycle, maybe that makes sense. But the idea is that in the absence of leadership, or if something goes incredibly, incredibly wrong, this purpose should be the support structure that the team can fall back on and figure out, okay, what do I need to do now? So you want it to be something that is, sort of really grounded. You want to try and steer away from the light and fluffy stuff, at least for that bottom half. You want it to be something that people can really orient themselves with and navigate uncertainty if they have to. Are there any questions or thoughts on that? Yes, Alexandra.
Yes, sorry, I keep asking questions. So say you're in a group with 5 or 6 others, and how would you actually facilitate this part? Because do you want to do it like step by step? So first aim, then the why, then achieve, etc. Or do you just say, hey, now take 5 minutes to write down what comes in mind to you? Or like how? Because it seems like there's a lot of questions in a very small block. So how would you facilitate this?
It's very dense, and there's kind of a trick with things like the team purpose, and we'll have some other lighter examples on step 4 and 5. One of the things we like to encourage is balancing your synchronous and asynchronous work. So with something like a team purpose, it can be quite sensitive. It can be, depending on your context and who you're working with. Some organizations will very much mandate these and be quite rigid on them. Other organizations won't actually really have a purpose. It's like, as long as I get the thing that I asked for, that's the purpose. And that's not going to be too useful to the team. So in a sort of coaching context, I try and qualify that ahead of the session. You know, if there's something to adopt or work from, I'll take that and pre-populate, and then turn it more into a, you know, how do we take this statement and make it more relevant to us as a team? How do we sort of tie that back to things like our team name and sort of make it a bit more intrinsic, something that's actually useful to us and gives us utility? If there's absolutely nothing there, that's where I'll sort of allow some space for some deep work, or at least do a bit of data capture, like get everyone's thoughts on there and make an action for sort of, you know, someone, be it the entire team or a working group of that team, to, you know, try and massage out some more solid wording and make it a bit more succinct after the session. The main thing that I want to get out of this, in the absence of having like a solid statement that people can, you know, sort of really orient themselves with, is at least capturing the intention of such a statement. So we want to make sure that any big hairy conversations around why are we here are at least surfaced, so people are aware of them and can action that, even if it is falls in the post-workshop bucket.
Okay, thanks. Sounds logical.
Awesome. Okie doke. So that's a little bit around team purpose. Yeah, so we'll be a bit more interactive with the following steps. So situational empathy. It's an interesting term. To be honest, I was sort of one of the folks that put a lot of research into the background of this. I can sort of explain how and why it works the way that it does. I will just caveat that with I find situational empathy an interesting title because to me it's kind of just empathy. Maybe that's me being a bit of a clinical psychotherapy nerd. But anyway, subcategories aside, you might notice that on this very weird geometric pizza shape, what we've got are a bunch of fairly abstract statements, and that is for a fairly sound reason. Essentially, in a remote working context, from a, you know, sort of home living circumstances situation, we don't have all the knowledge in the world around what kind of circumstance the people at the other end of the call are in. Some people might be share housing, some people might be taking care of you know, people that are off screen that need support, and you can also sort of run into other yeah, sort of more difficult circumstances. The objective of this space is not to create an inquisition for those situations. It is for people to be able to surface up the needs that the team might need to be aware of, so they can cater to that and be aware. What you'll tend to find as well when facilitating this section is that people will often offer things, offer extra information. That's usually, to me, a fairly reasonable sign that there's a degree of trust or safety within the team. I don't push back on that, but I also restrain myself from hunting for it either. The standard way that I'll run this, if I've got no indication or anything like that around how safe these team members are between each other and how strong their relationships are, I'll actually do this completely asynchronously. It's a survey they get a week ahead of time, and then I'll pre-populate the information. If I've got a bit more of a sense of the team and I know sort of that they already collaborate a bit and you know each other fairly well, I'll probably still anonymized, but I'll bring back my favorite friends, the dots. I might just, for the purpose of this exercise, change the color. I'll usually pop them around fairly haphazardly, just to make it a bit random. I still want things to be a little bit interactive. And then it's as simple as people dragging dots over to the things that make the most sense to them. As an example, I mentioned two of my cats are absolutely terrible. And see, here I am, even just in a mock version, I'm narrating some of the reasons behind it. Reasons are fine as long as you don't try and fish them out of people. But the fundamental element is what we're trying to do here is capture some of those dynamics that people might be playing with. As an example, around probably 8 months ago, I definitely didn't have an ergonomic workspace. And when running this exercise with the remote AF team, we actually had a couple of people sort of opt for that one for various different reasons. And then when we get down to the team behaviors, we can start actually factoring that into, from a expectation and policy perspective in terms of how we behave with each other. How does the situational empathy section change what we might expect from each other? A favorite one of mine, because I've seen in a couple of circles this sort of notion come up where you can't have human connection unless the cameras are on, which I will, for the remaining of my working days, outside of the times where I'm feeling a bit under the weather, I tend to have my camera on and whatever mess I've got in the background is there because I like to do that. I also will never hold any judgment to anyone with any degree of obscuring visibility. If you want to have your camera off, great. Virtual background, fantastic. As a human to another human, I'm going to sit here and just assume that if you've turned up to this session, you care about something happening in it. That's not always going to be the case because people will have different things going on in their lives. And that is no different to if we're in an office space and someone's texting when we're running a workshop and at a whiteboard. Like, it's still just humans beings. So that's situational empathy. Anna Maria, yes, questions. Lovely questions.
So I wonder, I already like the thoughts that you have in here. Is the team also able to add something that you probably haven't asked in these 5 questions or situations?
Absolutely. These, we've selected the ones that we have mainly to challenge in certain organizations, particularly the ones where they're sort of potentially struggling a lot more with, sort of those more human skills side of things and dealing with people's various individual experiences. These tend to be the things that those organizations, generally speaking, will push back on. Sort of interruptions and camera being on or off tend to be things where you can get some really unfortunate policies cropping up out in the wilds. So we've basically put these there to provoke the argument and also kind of highlight that it's not just for the common folk that this stuff is a problem. Like, this happens to everyone because it's a human experience. It's not, it's not that selective. When running this sort of myself, I have a really vivid memory of a particular team where they had been very much in office. The organization, they're in a scale-up phase, so they were already going through a bunch of change, and the organization had made a strategic decision to sort of start shifting away from the office. So there would be a remote preference. The office would still be available if required, but whenever possible, just work remotely where you are. As long as we're getting outcomes, we don't mind too much. Now, one of the leaders in that team, not from a sort of control sort of orientation, but more just because a big part of him feeling connected to his team came from the coffee walks and the lunches and the beers. And for him, he was like, I'm like, this has just been ripped away from me. It's like, it's not even because I want to sit there and watch you work. That's incredibly boring and I'm very busy. It's, I want to be able to connect with you. And that was one of my favorite things that have ever sort of surfaced up out of this exercise. Like, he just wanted to add something in. And I sort of made sure that the space was aware, like, you can add things in. The one thing that we're not going to do is try and dig in to people if, we want to investigate, why do you want your camera off? Or who do you share your workspace with? Like, as long as you set that context up front, that's not something that we want to do in this exercise. Absolutely, let people add stuff in. It'll lead to some magical moments. Any other thoughts, questions, reflections?
Yeah, I feel like if I look at the teams I'll be working in, for me it would also feel logical in this section to just ask people, like, how much involved are you in this project? Like, how busy are you? are you able to put all your time and energy, like when you're in this meeting, are you actually like in this meeting, or do you have other things that maybe are on your mind because you have like a deadline or something? And I'm not sure if that's also if that fits here. It for my personal situation, it would be more logical to dive a little bit into that than the other questions which are here. But
yeah, this space we are somewhat constraining ourselves more to those, you know, sort of human elements, which you might find some of that stuff will come up here. I think there's probably, I've covered up 2 sections of the canvas to narrow our focus. I think there's potentially some other tools in those covered sections that we can come back to that'll focus more on that side of things. Yeah, that's definitely a valid element, and particularly pressures from work. You know, you can find running this exercise can sometimes feel a little sensitive for some participants, and they might bring up all sorts of things that are not strictly around, like, you know, how is it different for me working at home or working from wherever I might be working. And they might sort of bring in more of the work to be done strains, which, you know, again, all of this stuff is essentially data capture to be brought down into that step 6. It's still completely valid stuff to have a chat about. Anna Maria, yes.
Yeah, so to what Alexandra just said, I think that going through this, through the map and the framework happens every X amount of time. So I don't think this is an exercise that you would do with your team every week or at the beginning of each meeting or anything like that. So most probably this is an exercise that takes a while for the team to identify and probably build in those, if you want, rituals or maybe behaviors or things that the team needs to incorporate in their daily work. So something like starting every meeting with a question or checking like, hey, are you fully present? Let's take a moment for you to leave all your worries behind and fully present on the meeting. That might be something that the team creates as a ritual because they feel like, hey, because I'm jumping from meeting to meeting, I need those 2 minutes at the beginning of each meeting to detach and fully immerse myself into what is it that we're talking about there. Although I'm not sure if this framework is something that you would go, so, and this is where my question comes from this comment, how often would you go with your team through this process?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what I like to focus on is when are there changes that are going to impact the team. So as an example, we've got the team purpose up there. If something influences or alters the team's purpose, to me that signals a good reason to revisit this potentially in full. If a new team member is joining or maybe even a existing team member leaving, that's potentially a really good, both a learning experience for the new person and also a key experience for someone leaving to provide some feedback on how the team functions overall. The other thing, which wasn't actually advice from Remote AF, it was just something that some of the practitioners came up with, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, was actually, you know, so it's these templates can go into virtual collaboration spaces and digital whiteboards. And people have quite often, you know, their reflection activities or their retrospectives tend to happen in the same space. So if you just hold if you're in the agile area, your retrospectives in the same board that this already exists, anytime actions come up that are oriented to, you know, your system of work, how your meetings are run, or the behaviors within the team, you've already got all the information you captured and worked on before right here. So you can actually just bring that into the discussion and start playing around with it. So preferred hours. This is where we spend a bit of time building some appreciation for, you know, the differences in the times. I myself tend to work early mornings and late nights. Middle of the day is a terrible time to reach me because I am probably not at my desk. Someone that I work quite closely with, Tony Ponton, he is more of a morning guy, doesn't like to hang around in the evenings. So for he and I, the early morning space, that is like liquid gold for us to collaborate. And that's what we're looking to surface up here. An example that one of our early adopters prepared earlier, and he's actually got a Google Docs kind of based tool that you can use this yourself. So this is from Mark Kilby at Hours of Overlap, which I'll drop into here. From the Canvas perspective, what we're looking to do is make sure that we understand when are the critical times that we want to collaborate. I've, sort of where I've got less time zones to wrestle against, I've literally just expressed this as a couple of sticky notes. Where there are more time zones, using things like spreadsheets or any other kind of time calculators can be really useful to try and narrow that discussion down. The main thing is to pay attention to, sort of on this example, we've got 2 hours that are 100%. So that means it works across everyone for all the different time zones we've got to play. So those are the critical hours. That's when we'll, spend our time coordinating and sort of, rallying the troops to do some collaboration. Outside of that window, we're probably just going to call it asynchronous work. Whether or not you're at your desk from 9 to 5, as a team, I'm not gonna really mind, because I care about those 2 hours, and those 2 hours is when we need to, sort of come together and get some of the stuff done that we can't get done separately. Again, if you don't have that many time zones to wrestle with, a couple of post-it notes just sort of highlighting school pickups for half the team happen at say 3 or 4 o'clock or whenever it might be. So we won't do meetings then because it's not useful. It really just depends on how much in the way of time zones you're playing with. But yeah, just try and focus and isolate on the times where people can work at their best rather than juggling things. Alrighty, any comments or questions on the preferred hours space? Fantastic. I also, the link that I shared for Mark's Hours of Overlap, Mark Kilby is a fantastic chap. With Johanna Rothman, they co-authored a book on distributed working that is pretty awesome stuff and was out well before COVID. So they'd done a whole research piece around some of the more useful practices. So if you enjoy some good nighttime reading, that is definitely a recommended read. Virtual collaboration. So trying to explain this ahead of an example is never particularly useful. It's one of those things where it helps just to have a bit of a play around with it. So I'm just going to pop in 2 tools that we are currently using to collaborate. The first is Miro, and the second is, of course, Butter. So what we've got here is a nice round circly looking thing, and the things up the top are outside of our control as a team. The things down the bottom are within our control as a team. If it's on the left, it's disrupting our ability to collaborate and work together. If it's on the right, it's an enabler, and we like that. So I'm just going to take a little bit of liberty here and free license and pop these 2 in here, because so far as I can tell, I'm just going to make an assumption on behalf of the audience. Butter and Miro are both enabling our collaboration. They're working quite well. And we are at ButterMix, and I built the thing on Miro ahead of time, so it's probably outside of our control to influence it. Now, I'll just throw a third one into the mix, say Microsoft Word as an example. Apologies to anyone in the future that may be watching this and really loving Microsoft Word. We're just playing around with it. So if something comes up, and essentially, like from a facilitation perspective, really good thing just to lead with an example. Once you throw down 1 or 2 things, people will get it and then start adding the litany of systems that they have to work with. But in terms of how we triage and treat things, luckily the team's actually kind of already done most of that work for us. So if someone's said Microsoft Word is outside of our control and it's disrupting our ability to collaborate remotely, where our action actually lies in the center there. So we're going to seek support. So again, a lot of the value of this session comes out the other end of it when you're looking at the action backlog, and hopefully have lots of names assigned to them, so they're not just cool ideas. But we're then going to try and escalate and challenge the constraint of this team using Microsoft Word, or at least see what we can do within the team to make that work a bit easier for us. But not all things are going to be outside of our control. We might actually have a tool that's within our control. Maybe we don't have to choose Microsoft Word. There might be other options on the approved tooling list for the organization, or maybe the organization just doesn't have an opinion. So when that's the case, then we've just discovered an improvement item for the team to pick up and carry out after the session. Similar again, action items without names tend to be just good words. And also from a coaching perspective, this is one of those sections where it will just generate a bunch of work for you to be able to narrow your focus on, because if these things are disrupting the team's collaboration, are we only looking at tools? Yes, but I do have something else for that stuff outside of the tooling space in just a moment. I am getting there. So anything turning up on the left-hand side of that circle is essentially developing your coaching backlog and some of the things that you can do to help the team improve time. All it takes after the session is just to prioritize it and see who you can work with. So we've got a question around tooling. There is a similar activity that will look more broadly than tools. This section is very intrinsic to the team. But are there any other thoughts, perspectives, comments?
I had the same question as Anna Maria. Yeah.
So we do have a space where we look much broader than just the team and have a look at some of the other extrinsic factors. This, we're just trying to make sure that the team has what they need to collaborate, communicate, and sort of get that job done. And where the systems the team have been provided aren't working for that, we want to probably have some pretty robust conversations outside of the session. In the interest of getting to that sooner, I'll zip on down to team behaviors. So I always butcher the quote, so I'm not going to try and repeat it. But one of the sort of reference pieces that we use in Remote AF is essentially, culture is the worst behavior you're willing to accept. So we want to try and get pretty explicit around that. Values are fantastic. We have our own, most organizations have some kind of value statement or set of values that they work behind. But we want to actually spend a bit of time here and make it a bit more explicit. So what are the kind of behaviors that demonstrate these values? What's actually important to this team compared to other teams? And we do that in 4 sections. The first is what kind of vibe you want to create in the team. Are you a team that are literally here just to get the work done and don't want to have to deal with the other people in the team? If that is a consistent theme across the team, it's not how I like to work, but I have seen teams that do love that. And we're trying to figure out what this team's vibe is, not the vibe I want them to have. So let that emerge as it may. What can you count on from each other, from each person in the team? So this is where we're starting to look at, what are some of the behavioral expectations we might have? I've literally actually sort of had to steer into, like, is swearing okay or not? Because I noticed every time that there was a couple of people on that particular session who were avid in sort of dropping the occasional spicy word, and I could visibly see the discomfort of some of the other members of the team when they did so. And it turned out actually they just didn't like it because they had volume issues on their headset. But again, we want to act from a position of ignorance here and try and sense out the room in a more explicit manner. Up in the top right-hand corner, we've got, how do we want to be together when things get difficult? Now, I usually contextualize this from there's something happened outside the team, outside of your control, that's a bit messy. or maybe we're having an argument between team members. All of these things can be difficult. What I want to know is, outside of just saying the word polite or respectful, because that can mean a lot of different things depending on our own cultural backgrounds, how we were raised, just our general viewpoint on the world. In case it hasn't come across, along with stubbornness, I can just generally be a bit of a sour human at times, and I can be a bit cynical. Probably picked that up from some of my other co-authors, but I can also get quite excited and passionate about a good debate. So it's really important to actually make sure that we're not just leaving things at the word respect. We want to start using that as a bit of reason for inquiry. So what's respect look like in this team? So how do we demonstrate that to each other? And looking for statements, not just single words, especially in that corner, it can be a bit of a pitfall where people like to leave things lighter. And then lastly, down in the bottom there, we've got what will make the team grow even more. So this is where we want to start, talking about what kind of commitments do we want to make as a group of humans to, not just stop at being a team that is launched, but I want to skyrocket. I want to grow and improve. It's a natural human desire to learn and evolve and grow with the times. How as a team are we going to work that into our practices? And the last thing that I'll sort of say on the team behavior section is we've done all this data gathering and context setting up the top. So as a facilitator, it is a completely reasonable thing for you to expect to see some of that reflected in how the team will behave down the bottom. So if you've got a lot of clustering or distribution of dot points on your situational empathy, push for people to actually articulate behaviors and expectations that they might have of each other to reflect that. If you've got particular times of the day that are going to be important, reflect that. If there's discomfort or things around the purpose, and the purpose is going to be something really figural to making the team grow, that sounds like a great thing to be a bit more purpose-oriented and a bit sharper on that down in the growing section. So you definitely want to try and start bringing people back up. And the other thing that I'll say around this from a facilitation perspective, the team behavior section by far and away will take the longest out of this section of the canvas because it's trying to reference all the other data points. All righty. Any thoughts, questions, perspectives on that piece? Excellent. I will take silence as golden. And now for the slight reveal. So going to do something a little bit cheeky and bring everyone to me. We've got about 4 minutes left. And as you can see, we don't just have the social contracting side of things on this canvas. We constrained ourselves to that for this session because it's one of the easier ones to sort of learn your way around the canvas and start to navigate. We've also got the systems of work, and the operational cadence. Systems of work is very much oriented around how the work gets done, how we can be intelligent in designing that. And operational cadence, if absolutely nothing else, is entirely focused on how do we save time by making the most of our collaborative time and start rationalizing all the digital tools and different ways that we might be back channeling with each other. Because it came up, whoa, that was, should have switched to the handle. Just because it came up a little bit earlier, I'll just highlight step 3 of system of work, support and constraints. This is where we start having a similar conversation to virtual collaboration. However, we are excluding tools, or at least individual tools. So you want to start looking at things like your company's governance. You want to start looking at things like other teams that you rely on or interact with. Again, I'll just lean into the software space. If there's a DevOps pipeline that is amorphously managed by someone at some point in time and it's critical to your team surviving, maybe that goes in there. So that's where we want to start looking at all the other external to the team, sort of, you know, all those constructs, support mechanisms, systems. And that's where we want to, again, surface up what is some of that fodder for the coaching backlog in the escalate for help and focus on fix. Because again, these are all probably going to amount to relationships or people. So we want to start trying to stimulate those connections in the organization if they aren't working for the team at the time. With the couple of moments we've got left, more than happy to do a bit of free exploration, have a chat about any parts of this that people are interested in. Yes, Anna Maria. I think you're on mute.
Since we've changed, it was, yeah, you were automatically unmuted when the mic was passed to you, and now you're not. So it's a changing behavior. I have two questions, John. So the first one refers to how long will take on average to go through all of these frameworks with a team, because you're working sync and async, right? And does it is it depend? Is it like super flexible and you can do whatever, or do you have like a recommended time frame?
So I think there's kind of the hidden constraint, which tends to be the time allowed for the facilitator and the facilitator themselves. So if you've got some practice with this and you know how to make it work asynchronously for your facilitation style, you can probably get through this pretty quickly. Maybe even, you know, sort of looking at things like sort of an hour and a half at a bit of a push. One of the things that you want to watch out for is visualize the work and channels of communication. Those two on their own could be their own sort of behemoth. It's really around the setting constraints for yourself and making sure that you're launching the team to do their own work following the workshop, rather than necessarily you trying to handhold them all through it. For someone that is not as comfortable or feeling a bit new, or sort of, you know, trying to do it untrained, that kind of thing, I'd probably suggest more around 90 minutes to maybe even 2 hours for some parts per pillar. So obviously that's sort of, you're spending into the half day space. And look, again, I've run this a whole bunch of times, and I've had teams just want to do it because they were afforded the half day version and they wanted to spend that time on it. So they did. So you kind of, you know, you can save a lot of time though. You can, in the order of hours, you can cut out by doing asynchronous prep with SMEs from the team, using survey tools, referencing existing documentation. There's a whole lot of this stuff that you can prep and use this as more of an alignment activity, and then have the conversations that matter.
Yeah. And would you start with team alliance, move to systems of work, and operational cadence? Is that the flow?
That's the flow that we recommend. The reason for that being, you know, humans inform the work and the work informs the communications. And that's usually the flow that we'll use across most things. I've seen a lot of people start to like basically go from left to right. And in most cases, those groups, and I haven't been able to understand why, but in most cases, they usually just stop at remote team alliance and they just do the middle and the left. And then they don't do the one that saves them time, which has always confused me. But sort of such as it is, the one piece of feedback I'll add to that though is most of the guides that have gone that route have then had to, through other means, revisit the operational cadence further down the line. So my suggestion would be, if you're going to run this canvas at all, you know, do all the parts that make sense, but operational cadence will save you time. So consider that in a part of your prioritizing.
Yeah. And the last question from me, if I go back to the very, very, very beginning of the session, when you mentioned that you can run this with the team, with the groups of teams, or I think you call them divisions, and then with the executives, like if someone brings you in for for a full like transformation, whatever, like the company as a whole is going through some sort of a big change, would you usually start from the top and start working with the executives and then bring bits and pieces into teams of teams and then trickle down to teams? Or would you start from teams and bring it up to the higher level?
The really harsh and practical answer is I will start from the point where I have influence. So that will vary depending on the nature of the transformation or the organization or the adoption or whatever other factors you might want to consider. What I will mention is the team launch canvas. Like if you want to think of an organization like a massive skyscraper, we view the team launch canvas as kind of like, you know, the foundational bricks, because without teams, organizations most often don't exist. So this is something that we tend to run consistently. So if a particular department's like, hey, I need this support, we'll usually want to have a pretty strong conversation around, okay, well, you know, like if you're nervous, we can test with one team, but what you really want to do is actually run this across all of your teams, because that's how you start getting alignment and consistency while respecting the context of the team's work.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Awesome. Alexandra, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I was about to say the same.
Yeah, I always have a dozen of questions, but I I also see the time, and then I'm like, okay, I don't want to like bore other people with my questions, but maybe just one. If we go up to the wheels, and then you said today we're looking at hey, it's gone. The blue, yes, there it is. We're looking at the blue one, and then you said today we're in the high performance top right area.
Team launch,
yeah, like how does this relate to the rest of the wheel? Like are there similar exercises for this during that wheel, or should I see it different? Or yeah,
sure. So as I mentioned, we've got a lot of things where we like to do reuse. So one example of where that lives in the between execution and outcomes, we've got team reflection, team review, and team planning. If you have a little squiz in operational cadence, we've got remote team events, and in there lies our event planning canvas, which, you know, events are events. Anytime you want to bring people together around a topic, that thing's been used for music events, it's been used for weddings. It most often sees its use in the corporate sphere, mainly with those three events, which is why we put them there. But that is one example. Now, some of those labels around the wheel are more advice-based patterns or things where we've got like other bits and pieces lying around. So like strategic integration takes a lot of influence from OKRs, and that strategic integration piece essentially for the team launch canvas will plug into the purpose, but you don't need to use that to still use the team launch canvas. Like you can kind of just run like after tonight's session, or maybe with a bit more Q&A, I have every confidence you'd be able to run at least the remote team alliance. The strategic integration part is a nice thing to have if there is a big push for strategic integration between enterprise and teams. And that is a useful tool to plug in there. But you don't have to use it if it's not relevant to your context. So the way I look at it is each of these wheels and the labels that sit around them are all a menu of options for people to solve problems in organizations. They work quite nicely together, and there's a lot of things that you can do to, you know, do nifty stuff, but they aren't mandatory to be used together.
Okay, thanks, John.
Awesome.
Well, that was it. Like how time flies when you're having fun. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John, for spending the hour and a half with us and taking us through the framework. There's a lot to explore still in terms of system of work and operational cadence. And I think that on the Remote AF website, we find the materials or more materials, or maybe we can even share this Miro board afterwards, just so we can have a bit of a more deep dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
there's also both the event planning canvas and team launch canvas are available on our website as well. If you just want to get some fresh copies for use, they are more than welcome to be taken.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for your time. And this was very insightful. And I feel that, it's a lot. One needs to sit with it and digest it, right? And thanks for being here, Alexandra. I hope that I took so much away, and I hope that you did too. And I'm curious to see where the two of us are going to use this, and how are we going to land it to our realities. So yeah, wish you both a great rest of the day. For you, John, a good night, and good luck tomorrow's workshop or training. And Alexandra, I will catch up with you soon.
Yes, thank you very much for this. I think I feel already inspired. So thanks.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure, and have a great day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.